But then beyond that, my grandfather told her, and I don't think I ever heard her say that until we were grown. And he said, "You're no less than anybody. You are no better than anybody here, but you are no less than anyone in this town." Well, in White Sulphur Springs, the public school for blacks ended at grade 8. And so with Granddaddy trying to educate 4 children, he at some point decided that he needed to move them all to West Virginia, which would have the high school at one spot and the college at the next spot. But that, I think, made her not feel that she was better than you, but you were no better than she was. And so she didn't have... The one thing in the movie, I think, when Taraji, who came and sat and just looked at Mom for 4 hours one day, she just wanted to soak up what she could. Wow. And Mom would just... And so she would never cower in any situation, but she would not let it deter her. Like the coffee, well, she'd bring her own coffee. The restroom, she'd go in the men's room, do whatever was most expedient so she could get back to work and do what she was there for.
So there was a level of confidence that was just innate with her that seemed to have been the reason why she was able to plow through that and persevere. The other thing is that it sounds like her technical skills were also played a pivotal role in breaking down some of those barriers as well. The confidence and the technical skills. She had competency. So that seems like that played a role also in her being resilient in the face of it.
Yes, well, Mrs. Vaughn made the assignments because you came into a pool of mathematicians. Mrs. Vaughn would then get, I don't know what you'd call it, but orders or description of the type of mathematician that the engineers do to work through his equations and they do values and be able to plot things. Because back then, they didn't have a space textbook. They had their own algebra, math, those kinds of things. And so, what was I saying? That's what happens when you're 77.
You've earned the right. You've earned the right. I don't have an excuse when it happens to me, so.
But
you were talking about her giving the instructions to the group when they came in.
And so she went, when she was assigned to the men, so they breathe like I do, and we have an assignment, and she looked at the assignment, and her very, very solid math background carried her into being able to respond to questions, provide answers, and she would ask questions whenever she felt a need to. And she said that she just didn't. I said, well, Mom, what did you use the most? Because you graduated in 37, and you taught school at high school and below for several years, and then you did this and that, and you didn't go to NASA till 53. How did you remember all of that? Which math did you use most? Algebra, math, calculus, geometry? She said all of them. Wow. She says just an equation. So it's being able to apply, and again, her vision. And I made a quote at some point. I said, brilliance trumped segregation, even though she was black in this white world. They needed answers because those of you who are old enough to remember, the Russians got a man in space, Yuri Gagarin, first, and the United States shut it. We can't let Russia take over the space world. And so NACA, and then NASA was in a rat race, according to them, to catch up and get ahead. So they needed very, very intelligent people. So that's what they did, and she just believed in her knowledge enough if she didn't know the answer, but where to find it.
Where to find it. Who were her role models? I mentioned earlier that she didn't necessarily have a precedent to reflect on. Did she have role models that she shared with you?
Her mother taught school until she married.
Okay.
And then after that, Granddaddy was her role model because she said he was the smartest man she knew. And she hovered around behind him and with him all the time because she didn't even wear shoes until she was in school. So she was with him on the farm one day, and she said, "Dad, I'm standing on something warm." He said, "Don't move." And she didn't move because Granddaddy said, "Don't move." And he went and got a gun and came back and shot a snake. She was standing on a snake. You know, so Granddaddy he had his own vision, but he lived by the almanac, and he did a lot of things. We called him a horse whisperer. He did a lot of things. He removed what's on my hands that I don't have any trace of. He didn't use anything but his hands and your faith in what he could do.
Amazing.
So I think it was her parents and her teachers.
Got it. The best first role models, always. So when did you first become aware of her significance to the country, NASA, what now has been unveiled as the pivotal role she played? When did that significance become, when was your awareness of that? When did that happen?
Well, my youngest sister who lives in Greensboro loves to tell this story because, I mean, Mom worked and it was a secret environment, and all we knew was that she worked at NASA, she was working on a space program, and we were aware of whenever the shots would go up because, you know, those early satellites, they were actually a piece of Reynolds wrap, kind of. They were very, very light, but if they traversed across the Earth, we could see them if we knew when they were going to come past and if we knew that they were doing it. So she shared that with us. But I got lost again.
Your sister.
So Kathy's at school at Bennett in North Carolina, and she's in the library, you know. And she looks, and here's this big picture of Mom. And back in the day, you wore a black outfit with a pearl necklace. We all wore those. That was almost like a uniform. And she said, "Oh, that's my mother." And big thing, it said NASA mathematician. And so she's looking, and so the library said, she said, "But that's my mother." So they read the article, and it goes down, and it says, and she has one daughter, Charlotte. Oops, Goebel. And so she said, "But it's my mother." So they put a retraction. So we started then, and then there was one of her professors was an under civilian assistant secretary of defense under somebody, Eisenhower back in there. Anyway, he called the college when I was at Hampton to have Mama a professional picture made of her. And we found out indirectly because they were going to put it in a government document of some sort. So we began to hear some things, but we didn't really hear a whole lot until many years later because, I mean, she didn't brag about it. Even now, it's still like pulling teeth. But when you realize in the scheme of things, there were, I think about NASA installations in the country back then, and each of them played a particular part in those space missions. So it took all of NASA to get the mission completed. And so she had her part, but then by the time public knew that there was a mission, all the work had been done for that one, and they were on to another one. Right. So you just kind of, you know, she didn't say...
She was doing her job.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of the humility that you just referenced. Tell the story about when the building was named after her at NASA, and she was invited to the ceremony and asked what were her thoughts about the building being named after her. What did she think about all of the fuss being made?
Well, last year, 2016, NASA built a new computational research facility at Langley in Hampton. And so in February of last year, they dedicated it, named it after her, a 40,000 square foot building. So when they got ready to have the ribbon cutting with the governor and a few other dignitaries, including Senator Warner and the NASA head and several other dignitaries, they went to her home to tape it because we couldn't always count on her being in good spirits at an occasion, although I think she gets energized whenever she sees a lot of people just to talk to, not to talk about her. So they said, well, Miss Johnson, how does it feel having a building named after you? She said, I think it's stupid. They said, what, cut? Wait a minute, let's do that again.
Second check.
Think of another word. She said, I think it's crazy. And that's what they played, and all the people laughed about it. And then she told me later, she said, you know, I kind of wish they'd named it after the team. So she just never took anything for granted or anything that she did as something she did, although I looked at those two missiles the two boosters that came off at the shot about a couple weeks ago, and they were landing back on Earth to be used again. Some of you may have seen that. And I said, I bet your mom's basic information had to do with them bringing those back right on target.
Absolutely. All these years later, I'm sure they are still leveraging all of the great work. And again, the humility and her being a team player saying, I wish they had named the building after the team. That speaks volumes. We're going to pivot a little bit because we're here talking a lot about your mom and her being an icon and her epic career and contributions to the space program in this country. But you have a pretty illustrious career yourself. So 30 years experience in the technology industry. So what cultivated that in you? Was her work was that a catalyst for you? Did she nurture that interest in you? How do you get to technology?
Well, I always wanted to major in math. I don't know what, excuse me, I don't know whether it was directly because of her, but I liked it. My son minored in it, and we have another nephew that's in the technical field. But I wanted to be a mathematician, and she wouldn't let me go on the boycotts when I was in college, because she said, I don't want you to get arrested, because then you won't be able to work at NASA.
Okay.
So I worked there for a year and a half in the reentry physics department, but I was in a little room with 5 other women. We were mathematicians with a supervisor, and the engineers would come in with the assignment and give it to the supervisor, who would assign one of us. So it wasn't quite the same as Mom's, because they sent her to the engineers to work more directly with them and with their knowledge. And then after that, I had to move. I got married, and I had one child, and my husband went to the State Employment Agency for a job in accounting, and the State Employment Agency said, we don't have jobs for Negro accountants. So my husband had to come home to New York to look for a job, and that was a test, but that's how we got up here. Then when we got up here, there were no government installations where I could use my math skill. So my husband said, you need to be a programmer. So I balked at that, but then I had to. But then in order to get that first job, Urban League was printed up in the corner of my application, and that's really how I got the first job in programming. And I started with ITT and Paramus, and then I went to UNIVAC and ended up in Bell Labs and working on globalization. We were doing tracking for the missile defense against the Chinese, and defending the country against that. So that was kind of what I worked on till I moved south again.
And I want it duly noted that you have some AT&T blue in your blood, because you did a little tenure with AT&T through UNIVAC, right?
Yeah.
Correct? Okay, so I wanted to make sure we claim that. Everybody make note of that. Okay, that'll be in the next book, so watch out for that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the fact that your mom, there's so many women who have been the indirect benefactors of her success.